When we think of Ross Geller, a few, well, very specific things immediately jump to mind, right? We remember the dinosaurs, obviously. We remember the multiple divorces. And of course, we remember the literal most famous phrase in sitcom history, "We were on a break." But there's this whole other side of Ross that we rarely stop to actually examine. What kind of father was he? Was he just an overprotective parent trying his absolute best? Or did his own deep-seated insecurities quietly shape the very way he raised his children? Today, we're going to uncover how Ross's parenting style actually tells us way more about his core character than any of his romantic relationships ever did. Okay, let's dive into this. Because to really understand Ross, we have to launch a deep dive investigation into his time as a dad. This isn't just a look at a funny sitcom father. It's a look at how personal insecurities and this really desperate need for control quietly molded his entire approach to raising kids. Here are our therapy session notes for today's explainer. First, the forgotten father. Second, Ross's parenting psychology. Third, projecting his anxieties. Fourth, the root of the fear. And finally, was Ross a good dad? Section 1. The forgotten father. Navigating parenthood. What's kind of wild about Ross is that he is literally the only member of the core friend group to actively navigate parenthood for the vast majority of the show. I mean, long before Monica and Chandler, he is right there in the trenches, first with Ben and later with Emma. He spends years balancing a super demanding career in paleontology, his core friendships, a highly complicated romantic life, and his kids. He also manages a pretty groundbreaking, non-traditional co-parenting dynamic with Carol and Susan. But here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. While he deeply, genuinely loves his children, that love is constantly and inextricably tied up with his intense personal anxieties. Section 2. Ross's parenting psychology. Analyzing Ross. So psychologists have long observed that parenting styles generally fall into 4 traditional buckets: authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and uninvolved. Normally, a parent naturally just leans toward one of these predefined spaces. But Ross, he doesn't really fit neatly into any of those boxes. Instead, he represents this fascinating hybridized mix: authoritative and anxious parenting. This is a highly involved, loving approach, but one that is heavily influenced by the parent's personal worries, their need for control, and a really profound fear of judgment. Think about Ross as a person for a second. This is a man who worries about absolutely everything. He worries about his marriages failing, his career trajectory, his fragile friendships. He even worries about whether people think he's boring. So it makes total sense that when he becomes a father, he brings those exact same anxious traits right into his authoritative fatherhood. Section 3. Projecting his anxieties, fears, and expectations. Now, as a highly anxious parent, Ross's biggest weakness is his tendency to project his own fears onto others. It's a classic psychological bait and switch. His reactions to his children's situations are rarely ever actually about the kids themselves, but rather his own unresolved issues. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what I mean. Let's look at 2 case studies. First, we have Ben's Barbie. When Ben wants to play with a Barbie doll, Ross gets incredibly uncomfortable, right? He desperately tries to redirect him to traditionally masculine toys. But the issue isn't the toy. Ross grew up as the golden child, the son who excelled academically and did everything perfectly according to his parents' strict expectations. So when Ben chooses a Barbie, Ross is actually confronting his own deep-seated fears of stepping outside social expectations. Then we have Emma's male nanny. When Rachel's father provides a highly qualified male caregiver for Emma, Ross panics. He worries constantly about safety in relationships anyway, but here he is specifically struggling to reconcile his own rigid ideas of masculinity with reality. In both of these cases, he is projecting his own gender and social insecurities right onto his kids. But we have to make a very important distinction here. A bad parent refuses to change. Ross changes constantly. Does he do it slowly? Oh, absolutely. Reluctantly? Yeah, very often. But he changes. In both the Barbie and the nanny situations, the episodes actually allow Ross to grow. He eventually realizes that his assumptions are the problem, not the people around him. His ability to learn and ultimately prioritize his children's happiness over his own discomfort, that is his absolute greatest strength as a father. Section 4. The root of the fear, underlying trauma. So we've seen how he acts, but now we really need to ask, what actually drives this behavior? What core trauma sits underneath all of Ross's parenting strengths and his, let's face it, embarrassing flaws. If he were sitting in a therapist's office today, they'd probably just tell him to trust his children more. But why can't he? Because underneath it all is one persistent, overwhelming phobia: the fear of losing people. Think about this timeline of loss for a second. Ross spends the entire series terrified of abandonment. I mean, right out of the gate in year 1, his marriage to his first wife, Carol, ends under incredibly painful circumstances. By year 6, he's experiencing the massive fallout of his second of multiple divorces. And throughout the entire 10-year run, he repeatedly loses and regains Rachel, all while managing friendships that, to him, occasionally feel incredibly fragile. Parenthood just amplifies that fear. When Ross worries too much, when he overreacts, or when he becomes overly controlling, those are actually desperate attempts to protect the people he loves from a world he knows he cannot control. Section 5. Was Ross a good dad? Evaluating success. So let's evaluate his overall success as a parent in what was a rapidly changing world. What is truly interesting here is the stark contrast to his peers. Television fathers in the 1990s were so often portrayed as detached, clueless, or just completely uninvolved. But look at Ross. He is highly involved, he is emotionally connected, he tells his kids he loves them, he desperately wants to spend time with them, and he celebrates their milestones. And crucially, he learns to cooperate. He puts his pride aside to prioritize Ben's well-being with Carol and Susan. Honestly, if anything, Ross was almost too involved. He remembers every tiny detail, he wants to fix problems immediately, and he worries excessively. And honestly, a lot of you watching this explainer right now, you probably recognize yourselves in Ross's excessive worrying and that intense burning desire to just fix everything for your kids. So here is the final verdict. Ross was loving but highly anxious. He was supportive but definitely overprotective. He was open-minded, well, usually only after wrestling with his own assumptions first. He was flawed and he was deeply human. Ross isn't an aspirational parent because he is flawless. He's relatable because he is just a regular human being doing his best to learn, fail, apologize, and grow entirely without a script. He's the parent reading every single instruction manual and staying awake at night wondering if he's doing enough. Ross Geller wasn't just the guy who shouted pivot. He was a father trying to make sure his children never had to. I absolutely love this quote from the source material because it just perfectly summarizes his entire journey. Underneath the boring paleontology lectures and the awkward jokes, he was desperately trying to get it right. But it leaves us with one final profound question. In our own modern era of helicopter parenting and constant anxiety, was Ross Geller actually a warning sign, or was he simply ahead of his time? Think about that for a bit. And hey, if you want to explore whether his romantic life was just as complicated as his parenting, be sure to check out our other psychological explainers. Thanks so much for watching, and keep learning!